It was an unusually quiet Saturday afternoon when the phone rang. The kind of peaceful, unassuming afternoon that you don't expect to shatter into a million pieces with a single phone call. I was sitting on the couch, enjoying a rare moment of stillness when my phone vibrated against the wooden table. I glanced at the screen, seeing the unknown number and briefly wondering who it could be. My thoughts were still heavy with the mundane tasks of the day, grocery shopping, laundry, and the gentle hum of the house around me. It wasn't a number I recognized, but I answered anyway. The voice that greeted me on the other end of a line was one I will never forget, frantic, panicked, and barely holding together. "Hello?" I asked, my voice already uncertain, sensing something wasn't right. The voice hesitated for a moment before speaking, as though the words were stuck in the throat of someone who wasn't sure how to break devastating news. Are you the mother of Lucy Edwards?" I could feel my chest tighten at the mention of my daughter's name. Lucy, my beautiful, innocent daughter, the one who had fought so hard for every step, every word, and every breath of her life. She was only 12 years old, but she had already gone through more than most people could bear in a lifetime. Born with cerebral palsy, she had never walked without assistance and had struggled daily with simple tasks that most of us took for granted. But Lucy was a fighter. She never let her disability define her. She smiled brightly, her joy contagious, and her spirit unbreakable. She had a love for life that was pure and beautiful, and I had devoted every ounce of my being to giving her the most normal, happy life I could. "Yes, I'm Lucy's mother. What's happened? Is she okay?" I asked, my voice trembling, a sinking feeling settling in the pit of my stomach. My heart began to race as I waited for the response, the seconds stretching out like a lifetime. There was a long pause on the line, and then the words came tumbling out, rushed and jagged. "Ma'am, I'm afraid your daughter's been hurt. She's been found at the park, and she's bleeding. A lot. She's not moving, and we're waiting for the ambulance." The words didn't seem real. The park? Lucy loved that park. It was her sanctuary, her escape from the world that often didn't understand her. She would spend hours there, rolling along the path in her wheelchair, watching the other children play, and smiling at the few who treated her like just another kid. It was supposed to be her safe place. My mind couldn't process the words the stranger was saying. My legs felt like they were no longer holding me up. I grabbed the edge of the table, steadying myself, trying to will the words to make sense. "Wait, bleeding? What happened? Is she—" I couldn't finish the sentence. My throat constricted, and my voice caught in a sob that I didn't recognize as my own. "I don't know exactly what happened, ma'am, but there's a lot of blood. We need you to come to the park right away." The urgency in the voice on the other end of the line snapped me into motion. Every muscle in my body screamed to move, to get to Lucy, to make sure she was all right. But I could hardly stand. The panic set in. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it all, but there was no logic, no explanation for why my sweet girl, the one who had never asked for anything more than love and understanding, was now lying in the park, fighting for her life. "Where is she? Is she awake? What happened?" I demanded, struggling to stay calm. My hands were shaking uncontrollably, and I could hear the frantic sound of my breath as I struggled to take in air. My heart pounded in my ears, drowning out everything else. My thoughts were a blur, but one thing was clear: my daughter needed me. "Please, hurry," the voice said, and I could hear the sounds of a siren in the background now, growing louder as if time itself was speeding up. "We'll be waiting for you." I didn't even say goodbye. I just hung up the phone and ran toward the door. Every step felt like a nightmare. The world outside seemed to slow down as my thoughts raced ahead, imagining the worst possible scenario. What could have happened? Why would someone hurt Lucy? She had done nothing wrong. The drive to the park was a blur, my mind consumed by the vision of my daughter lying motionless, surrounded by strangers. What kind of cruel twist of fate would lead to this moment? And then it hit me like a ton of bricks, the woman from the HOA. Karen, the woman who had made our lives hell since we moved into the neighborhood. The woman who could never seem to mind her own business, the one who complained about everything from the size of our garden to the way Lucy liked to sit outside and feel the warmth of the sun on her face. The woman who had never liked us, who had never understood Lucy's needs or accepted her differences. I had always tried to brush off her snide remarks, her condescending attitude, but I couldn't ignore the growing animosity that I'd felt from her for months. And now, my gut was telling me that she had something to do with this. But what could she have done? The thought was unfathomable. I reached the park in what felt like no time at all. The parking lot was filled with emergency vehicles, their lights flashing in the distance, casting an eerie glow over everything. I stumbled out of the car, my legs unsteady as I rushed toward the scene, not even registering the other people around me. A police officer approached me before I could make it any closer. "Ma'am, you need to stay back," he said firmly, holding his hand up. I barely registered his words. "My daughter, Lucy Edwards, she's here. Is she okay?" I asked, my voice breaking as I fought to keep control of my emotions. The officer didn't answer right away, his eyes softening as he looked at me. "Ma'am, we're doing everything we can, but I need you to stay calm." I didn't want to stay calm. I needed to be by Lucy's side. I needed to hold her hand, to make sure she knew I was there, that she wasn't alone. But the officer gently guided me to a bench away from the chaos, and I could see the medical team working on her in the distance. My world was unraveling around me, but I couldn't take my eyes off the scene. The blood, the frantic doctors and paramedics. And then I saw it, Lucy's wheelchair lying abandoned on the grass. The truth hit me like a freight train. Someone had attacked her. And as the reality of what had happened started to set in, one thought kept circling in my mind. Karen, this wasn't an accident. This wasn't some random event. This was a cruel, calculated act of violence. And the person responsible was someone I never, ever expected. The woman from the HOA, the one who had made our lives miserable, was now responsible for my daughter's suffering. In that moment, everything inside me froze. My thoughts were consumed by one thing only, finding out why, and making sure that woman paid for what she had done. My thoughts raced back to when we first moved into the neighborhood. Lucy and I were looking for a fresh start, a place where she could have a bit of peace, and perhaps even make a few friends. The house we found was charming, nestled in a quiet community that seemed perfect for a mother and her disabled daughter. The kind of place that looked like it could offer the stability and safety we desperately needed. The neighbors were friendly, or so it seemed at first, and the park at the center of the neighborhood became Lucy's sanctuary, her little slice of heaven where she could escape the world's cruel gaze and just be a kid. I remember when we first met Karen. She was the president of the Homeowners Association, HOA, and she made herself known from the very beginning. At first, it was just the typical small talk about the neighborhood, the rules, and the regulations. I didn't think much of it at first, but as time went on, I began to notice her eyes on us more often than I would have liked. Whenever I would wheel Lucy down to the park, Karen's sharp gaze would follow us, her eyes narrowing, always assessing, always judging. It started with comments here and there. "Your daughter shouldn't be out in the heat for too long," she'd say, even though I knew Lucy thrived in the sun. "You should be more careful where you park. There's a spot designated for visitors, she would remark coldly, making sure we knew we didn't belong as much as others. I'd smile, politely, trying not to let it bother me. But deep down, I could feel the tension building. At first, I chalked it up to her being a perfectionist or overly concerned about the neighborhood. But soon, it became clear that her behavior wasn't about the house or the garden or the noise. It was about Lucy, my daughter, and the fact that she was different. I don't know why Karen couldn't see it, but it was as if she couldn't tolerate the very idea that someone like Lucy existed in the neighborhood. Karen was the kind of person who prided herself on being the authority, the enforcer of rules, the one who kept everything in perfect order. She had a reputation for being strict, for making sure every resident adhered to the HOA guidelines. But that wasn't just about the property. That was about control, about her need to dictate everyone else's lives. And when it came to Lucy, her hatred for Anything out of place seemed to turn into something far more sinister. When the complaints started rolling in, first about the flowers in our garden, then about Lucy's laughter being too loud on the porch, and finally about the way our mailbox was positioned, I knew something was wrong. At first, I tried to appease her. We trimmed the flowers. We made sure Lucy kept her voice down when playing outside, but nothing I did seemed to make Karen happy. It didn't matter how hard I tried to fit in, how much I tried to be accommodating. The underlying animosity never went away. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized Karen was the type of person who believed in perfection, a world where nothing could stand out, nothing could be different. She probably saw Lucy's disability as an imperfection, a flaw, a reason for her to lash out. She hated that Lucy was a reminder that the world didn't always follow the same script, that some people had to fight harder, struggle more, and still found joy in a world that made things difficult. And I would never forgive Karen for that. The tension reached a boiling point one afternoon when I found Lucy crying in the park, sitting alone by the swings, her wheelchair abandoned beside her. She had been talking to some of the other kids, laughing and playing when Karen had approached her. I had no idea what was said between them, but when Lucy came back to me, there was something in her eyes I'd never seen before: fear. Karen had been too much for her that day. Her words had stung. Her actions had humiliated Lucy. And for the first time since we moved in, I saw my daughter retreat into herself. I had tried to talk to Karen, but she just brushed me off with a tight smile and a dismissive, "I don't know what you're talking about." But I knew then that things were not going to get any better. I couldn't allow my daughter to feel like she was unwanted or unwelcome in a place that was supposed to be her safe haven. I knew, deep down, that Karen was a threat. But even then, I never thought it would escalate to violence. Lucy, despite everything, continued to go to the park, always hopeful that she could find someone to play with. The other kids would occasionally interact with her, but I could see the hesitation in their eyes when they saw Karen standing by watching. It was as though Karen had poisoned the atmosphere, turning Lucy into an outcast without anyone saying a word. Yet Lucy still smiled, still hoped, and still believed in the goodness of people. I admired her strength, her resilience. She never let the cruel words or the stares get to her. She would simply roll along the park path as if she were the same as every other child. And in many ways, she was. She had a heart bigger than most people I knew, a heart that didn't see the world the way Karen did. Lucy didn't care about rules. She didn't care about being perfect. She cared about joy, about connection, and about sharing her love with the world. But now, as I sat in the cold, sterile waiting room of the hospital, with a feeling of dread that I couldn't shake, I realized the extent of Karen's hatred. She wasn't just a neighbor who disliked us. She wasn't just a woman with a grudge. She had become something darker, someone willing to destroy the very thing that made our family special. The realization hit me hard. Karen had watched my daughter struggle, fight for her place in a world that didn't always understand her. And instead of offering help, offering kindness, she chose to attack. She chose violence. I couldn't understand it. I couldn't fathom how someone could do something so cruel to an innocent child. How could someone watch as Lucy fought for her life, knowing how hard she had worked for everything she had, and not feel a shred of empathy? How could someone who supposedly lived by a set of rules turn into the very thing they claimed to despise? Someone who believed in control at any cost, even if it meant hurting others. But now, as I sat in that cold hospital room, staring at the empty bed beside me, I knew one thing for certain. Karen had made a terrible mistake. Because no matter how much power she thought she had, no matter how perfect she thought the world should be, she had underestimated one thing: my love for my daughter. And that was the one thing she could never destroy. The days following Lucy's attack were the hardest of my life. As the hours and minutes crawled by in that sterile hospital room, I sat in a daze, my mind replaying every moment, every interaction I had with Karen. I couldn't make sense of it. How could someone with so much power, someone who held such sway in the neighborhood, become capable of such evil? I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't random. It couldn't have been. No, this had been planned, orchestrated with cold precision, and I had to find out why. Why my daughter? Why this? Lucy was in a medically induced coma, her tiny body lying still on the hospital bed, her face unrecognizable from the damage. Her injuries were severe, and the doctors couldn't yet say whether she would ever regain consciousness. Her breathing was shallow, and the machines around her beeped in rhythm, offering a false sense of hope. But I wasn't fooled. I knew that Lucy's chances of survival were slim, and each passing minute was both a blessing and a curse. The thought of losing her, the thought of never seeing her smile again, was unbearable. But it wasn't just the physical pain I feared, it was the knowledge that someone so filled with hatred had done this to her. As I sat vigil by her side, my thoughts were consumed by one thing: Karen. The more I thought about it, the more it seemed that this wasn't just an isolated incident. This was part of something bigger, something more insidious. Karen wasn't acting alone, I was certain of that. She had to have an accomplice, someone who shared her twisted views and was willing to take the law into their own hands. And that's when the pieces started to fall into place. The subtle signs, the whispers from the other residents, the rumors about Karen's connections, all of it suddenly made sense. Karen had been pushing her agenda for years. She didn't just want control over the neighborhood's rules, she wanted to reshape the entire community in her image. She wanted power. She wanted to be the one who decided who belonged and who didn't. Lucy, with her disability, had become the target, the symbol of everything Karen despised. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that Karen had been planning this for months, maybe even longer. And I had been blind to it all. I wasn't sure where to start, but I knew I couldn't sit idly by and wait for justice to be served. No, I needed to take action. I needed to find the truth. The first thing I did was to reach out to the other residents in the neighborhood. I needed information and I needed it fast. I wasn't sure if they would help me or if they were too intimidated by Karen's power to speak out. But I had to try. Some were hesitant to talk, afraid of the retribution that might come from speaking against the HOA president. But others, the ones who had also been on the receiving end of Karen's ire, didn't hold back. They told me about the whispers, the secrets, the things Karen had done behind closed doors. She's been like this for years. One neighbor, a woman named Claire, said, her voice trembling as she recounted her experiences, "She's controlling, manipulative, and she'll stop at nothing to get her way. You don't know the half of it." Claire explained that Karen had a history of driving out families she deemed undesirable. She had orchestrated covert campaigns to isolate certain residents, spreading rumors and creating division within the community. The goal was simple. She wanted a neighborhood where she could dictate the rules, where everyone fit into her narrow, controlling worldview. But there was more. Claire revealed that Karen had been seen meeting with someone recently, someone from outside the neighborhood. A man. She thought, though she couldn't say for sure. They would meet in secret, often late at night near the park. Claire wasn't sure what they were discussing, but she suspected it wasn't anything good. I couldn't help but wonder if this mysterious man had been part of the plan. Was he the one who helped Karen carry out the attack? Or was he merely an accomplice in a larger scheme to take control of the neighborhood? I needed answers. I needed to know who was helping her and why they thought it was acceptable to hurt my daughter. I couldn't shake the feeling that the Park Lucy Sanctuary was the perfect place for Karen to strike. It was public enough to make it look like an accident, but isolated enough to make sure no one would intervene. Karen knew Lucy would be there, knew she would be alone, and she had taken full advantage of it. The more I uncovered, the more I realized how deep Karen's reach went. She wasn't just a woman with a vendetta, she was a woman with a plan, and I was going to make sure that plan was unraveled. I started my own investigation, quietly gathering evidence from the neighbors and trying to piece together the timeline of events leading up to Lucy's attack. It wasn't long before I found something unsettling. A neighbor who had seen Karen that very day, just hours before Lucy was attacked, had reported that Karen was acting strange, agitated even. She had been pacing back and forth outside her house, muttering to herself. And then, just before the attack, Karen had left the neighborhood, heading toward the park. I wasn't sure if this was the smoking gun I was looking for, but it was a start. I had to get to the park, retrace the steps, and try to find any evidence that would lead me to Karen's accomplice. But time was running out. Every day Lucy was unconscious, every day she slipped further away from me, was another day Karen and her accomplices were free to do whatever they wanted. I couldn't wait for the police any longer. I had to act. That night, I sat up late, combing through old HOA meeting notes and emails, looking for any mention of Karen's secret meetings or hidden agendas. And then I found it, an email sent just days before the attack, outlining a special project that Karen had been working on. It was vague, cryptic, but the mention of further measures caught my eye. What did it mean? I couldn't wait any longer. I had to get to the bottom of this. Karen's plan, her network, her twisted idea of perfection. I had to find out who else was involved and stop them before they hurt anyone else. I could feel the weight of what was at stake pressing down on me. It wasn't just my daughter's life anymore, it was the future of the entire community. And I would do whatever it took to bring Karen and her accomplices to justice. I had no idea just how dangerous my next move would be. By the time I had gathered enough evidence, I was no longer just a mother fighting for her daughter's justice. I had become a woman on a mission, consumed by a single, powerful desire to expose Karen for the monster she truly was. The weight of my pursuit felt unbearable, but there was no turning back now. I was in too deep, and I wasn't going to let Karen or anyone else get away with what had happened to Lucy. The more I dug into Karen's past and the suspicious meetings she'd been having, the more I pieced together the terrifying reality. She wasn't just a lonely, controlling neighbor. She had found a network, a group of like-minded individuals who believed in taking drastic measures to enforce their vision of the world. The further I got, the more I realized that Lucy's attack was just the beginning. Karen had orchestrated it with the help of her secret allies, and they were willing to go much further to achieve their goal. My investigation led me to an old, abandoned building on the outskirts of the neighborhood, the kind of place that most people would overlook. I had seen Karen enter the building one night, her car parked out of sight, disappearing inside with a sense of purpose that sent chills down my spine. But I hadn't acted on it. I should have. I should have followed her then, but I didn't. I had let doubt cloud my judgment, and now my daughter was paying the price. But tonight I was ready. I had no more doubts. I wasn't going to wait for the police. This was personal. I gathered everything I could, from the emails to the statements from the neighbors who had witnessed Karen's strange behavior. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was undeniable. I knew that if I confronted her now, it might be my only chance to stop whatever else she had planned. The darkness of the night felt suffocating as I drove through the streets, my eyes scanning the road ahead, knowing that I was heading straight toward danger. The building loomed ahead, its windows dark and abandoned-looking, a perfect hideout for people who wanted to stay in the shadows. My heart was pounding, the adrenaline coursing through my veins as I parked my car at a safe distance. I crept toward the entrance, my footsteps muffled by the soft earth beneath me. The place was eerily silent, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. My instinct screamed at me to turn back, but I pushed through the fear. I had come too far to back down now. As I reached the door, I paused, listening for any sound that might give me a clue about who else was inside. I could hear muffled voices, low and urgent, drifting from the crack in the door. I took a deep breath and carefully pushed it open, just enough to slip inside. The air was thick with tension, the kind of quiet that felt wrong, as though something was waiting to explode. My eyes quickly adjusted to the dim light, and I saw them. Karen, standing near the back of the room, speaking to a man I didn't recognize. I couldn't hear their words, but the way they stood close together, leaning in, made it clear that this was no ordinary conversation. They were plotting, and from the way Karen's hand gripped the man's arm, it wasn't a friendly discussion. My blood ran cold. I needed to get closer to hear what they were saying, but the room was filled with shadows, and I was only a few feet away. It was risky, but there was no time to waste. I inched forward, keeping as quiet as I could. Just as I was about to step into the light, Karen's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. "You have no idea how far I'm willing to go to make this happen," she said. "Lucy was only the beginning. We need to show everyone that they can't mess with us. We need to take control, make sure no one ever dares to defy me again." The man nodded, his face obscured by the shadows, but his body language suggested a kind of agreement. No anticipation. They were planning something even more horrific. "I've got everything in place," he responded, his voice low. "The next step will be easy. All we need is to keep people scared and under our control. The HOA will be ours. And then no one will be able to touch us." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just about punishing me or my daughter, it was about something much bigger. They had bigger plans, and we were just the first victims in their scheme. Lucy's attack had been a warning, and I was starting to understand just how far Karen was willing to go. She wasn't just a woman with a grudge, she was a woman with power, and she would stop at nothing to keep it. I needed to get out of there. Fast. I backed away slowly, trying not to make a sound, but I hadn't been as quiet as I thought. A creak of the floorboard beneath my feet betrayed me. Karen's head snapped in my direction, and in that moment I knew my cover was blown. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice icy and full of menace. "Show yourself." My heart skipped a beat. I was trapped. I spun around to make my escape, but before I could make it out the door, I felt a hand grab my arm, pulling me back. The man from the shadows had caught up with me. His grip was like iron, and I could feel his breath on my neck as he hissed, "You should have stayed away, lady. You have no idea what you're getting into." I fought against his hold, panic rising in my chest. My mind raced for a way out, but my strength was no match for his. I had to think. I had to act. And then, through the chaos, I heard something that made my blood run cold, the sound of a gun being cocked. "Let her go." Karen's voice cut through the darkness. "She's already seen too much. We can't afford to let her walk away." Fear gripped me, and for a moment I froze. This wasn't just a threat anymore, it was real. But before the man could make a move, I did the only thing I could think of. I kicked him as hard as I could in the shin, causing him to stumble back in pain. I didn't waste a second. With everything I had, I bolted toward the door. But just as I reached the exit, I heard Karen's voice one last time. "You won't get away that easily," she sneered. "We'll finish this. You'll never escape us." My pulse was racing as I ran into the night, the weight of Karen's threat hanging in the air behind me. I had barely made it out, but I knew one thing: I had to stop them. Whatever it took, whatever it cost, I couldn't let them hurt anyone else. The battle for my daughter's life, for our future, was only just beginning, and I was ready to fight. I didn't stop running. I couldn't. Every step I took felt like the last breath of freedom I had. The night air hit my face as I sprinted through the deserted streets, my heart pounding in my chest, each beat urging me to keep going. But the weight of the moment, the danger I had narrowly escaped, pressed heavily against me. I could feel Karen's threat echoing in my ears, a constant reminder that I wasn't just fighting for my daughter anymore, I was fighting for my very survival. By the time I reached my car, my hands were shaking so badly that I could barely grip the steering wheel. I slammed the door shut, locking it, and immediately started the engine, driving away from the building as quickly as I could. My mind was racing, trying to process everything I had learned, everything I had seen. I had to make sense of the tangled mess of lies, manipulation, and violence that Karen had woven, but I couldn't do it alone. I had to find help. The one thing that haunted me more than anything was the fact that I still didn't know what Karen had planned next. She wasn't done. Not by a long shot. She had made it clear that she had a larger, more insidious agenda, and I knew deep in my gut that I was now tangled in a fight that went far beyond my daughter's attack. I had seen it in her eyes, the determination to silence me, to stop me from exposing her twisted network. When I finally arrived home, the house felt empty, even though I knew Lucy was still in the hospital, unconscious, fighting for her life. I couldn't bring myself to look at her empty room. The room that had once been filled with laughter, joy, and endless dreams. Now, it was just a reminder of everything we had lost, of everything that had been taken from us. I sat in the living room, the darkness of the night creeping in around me, and began to plan. The evidence I had gathered from the investigation wasn't enough to bring Karen to justice, at least not yet. I knew I had to take a different approach, but I also knew I wasn't alone. As terrifying as everything had become, I wasn't going to let Karen win. She had underestimated me. She had underestimated the strength of a mother's love, and she had underestimated the power of a community that would rise up against her. I needed help, more help than the neighbors who had already spoken out. I needed people who could fight alongside me, people who could stand up to Karen and her twisted reign. But I also needed information. More information about this secret group, this network that Karen had been involved with. I had to find out who else was involved and expose them before they could do more harm. The first person I reached out to was Claire, the neighbor who had been so brave in sharing what she knew. She had been the only one to see Karen's late-night meetings with the mysterious man. I called her, my voice urgent but shaky, as I explained what had happened at the building, the confrontation with Karen. Claire listened, her silence on the other end of the line telling me everything I needed to know. I knew it. She finally said, her voice low and tense. I knew there was something wrong with Karen, but I never thought she would go this far. You're right to be scared, but you're not alone. I'll help you however I can. We'll find out everything we need to know, and we'll make sure she can't hurt anyone else. Her words were a small comfort in the midst of all the fear and uncertainty. But I knew the truth. This wasn't just about Karen. This was about a dangerous network, a web of power and control that stretched far beyond my own community. And I had no choice but to dive deeper, no choice but to face whatever came next. Because if I didn't, Karen would just keep hurting people. She would keep targeting the vulnerable, and she would keep hiding in the shadows, pulling the strings. The next day, I visited Lucy at the hospital. Her condition hadn't changed. The doctors still weren't sure if she would ever wake up, but they kept assuring me that she was fighting. I held her hand, my eyes filling with tears as I whispered to her, telling her how much I loved her, how much I needed her. But beneath the surface, a fire was growing. I would not let this go. I couldn't. I wouldn't let Karen's evil destroy my daughter's future, and I wouldn't let her get away with what she had done. My resolve had hardened in the face of everything that had happened, and I knew this wasn't just a battle for justice. It was a fight for survival, for the future of the community I called home. As the days passed, I continued my investigation. I dug deeper into Karen's past, combing through public records, speaking to anyone who might know something about her connections. I found out that Karen had been involved in shady dealings for years, using her position in the HOA to manipulate and control others, all while building a network of like-minded individuals who shared her twisted vision. These weren't just regular people. These were people who would stop at nothing to maintain power, even if it meant hurting innocent families. I couldn't fight this battle alone, but I wasn't alone anymore. Claire had rallied a small group of neighbors who were willing to stand up to Karen, to help me expose her, and to take back the neighborhood that Karen had poisoned with her hatred. Together, we formed a plan, a strategy that would allow us to gather the evidence we needed without putting ourselves in direct danger. It was risky, but it was the only way to make sure Karen couldn't escape the consequences of her actions. Every day felt like a struggle, each moment pulling me further into a web of lies and deceit, but I had no choice. I had to see this through to the end, no matter the cost. For Lucy, for the people who had already been hurt by Karen's cruelty, and for the future of our community. As the sun set on another long day, I stood at the edge of the park, the place where it all started, the place where my daughter had been attacked, where Karen had tried to break us. The air was heavy, but there was a sense of determination that filled me, a sense that this chapter was far from over. We were going to take back control. We were going to expose Karen for the monster she was, and we were going to make sure she never hurt anyone again. The battle was just beginning, But I was ready. We all were. It had been weeks since the attack, weeks filled with sleepless nights, endless investigations, and the slow, agonizing process of trying to hold my family together. Lucy remained in the hospital, her condition still precarious, her body fighting but her mind unreachable. Every day, I came to her side, whispering words of encouragement, telling her that we were going to make sure Karen would pay for what she had done. But I knew, deep down, that this wasn't just about Karen anymore. This was about something much darker, something far reaching that I had yet to fully understand. The pieces of the puzzle were finally starting to fit together. After weeks of gathering information, interviewing former neighbors who had left the neighborhood under mysterious circumstances, and searching through Karen's records, I discovered a horrifying truth. Karen's actions weren't just about personal vendettas, and they weren't isolated to our neighborhood. She was part of a much larger organization, an underground network of wealthy, influential people with the resources and the power to control local governments, businesses, and entire communities. This group, which had operated in the shadows for years, sought to impose their vision of society on everyone else using fear, manipulation, and violence to maintain their control. I should have seen it coming. The way Karen had always been so adamant about maintaining her perfect little world. She hadn't just wanted the HOA to run smoothly, she wanted the neighborhood to bend to her every whim. But that wasn't enough for her. She needed more. She needed power, control over everyone. And she had found a way to achieve it by aligning herself with this covert group. As I dug deeper, the connections began to reveal themselves like a spider's web, stretching far beyond our quiet neighborhood. This network wasn't just influencing homeowners associations or local governments. They were actively involved in everything from land deals to political corruption, their fingers in every pie. And Karen? She was the link, the one who had been working behind the scenes, ensuring that their plan progressed one step at a time. But the most chilling revelation came when I discovered the true scope of Karen's personal involvement. The man I had seen with her that night at the abandoned building, he wasn't just an accomplice, he was the leader of this shadowy network. His name was Victor Blackwood, and he had been working with Karen for years, orchestrating everything from behind the scenes. Together, they had been pulling strings, influencing decisions, and making sure the neighborhood was their playground. The discovery hit me like a ton of bricks. I had been so focused on Karen and the personal vendetta she held against my family that I hadn't seen the larger picture. This was never just about her jealousy or her hatred for Lucy. This was about a massive operation that used people like Karen to control entire communities and further their own agenda. And we had been caught in the crossfire. The more I uncovered, the more I realized that my battle wasn't just for justice for Lucy. It was a fight for everyone, our entire community, and for people like us who had no idea they were living in the shadow of such a powerful, dangerous group. I sat in the dimly lit living room, my hands shaking as I reviewed the documents I had gathered. My heart was racing, but I couldn't stop. This had to be exposed. I couldn't sit back and let Karen or anyone in her network continue to ruin lives. The fight for Lucy's justice had become a fight for everyone who had been manipulated, controlled, and silenced by these people. The truth was more monstrous than I could have imagined, but just as I thought I had uncovered the full extent of their operations, the twist came. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table, poring over the final piece of evidence I had received from a contact who had worked closely with Victor, the phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but something in my gut told me it was important. "Hello." I answered cautiously, my voice trembling slightly. The voice on the other end was low, controlled, and dripping with a sense of satisfaction I couldn't quite place. "You think you've uncovered everything, don't you? You think you know the whole story, but you're wrong." My heart stopped. It was Karen, and she knew everything. "I know what you've been doing," Karen continued, her voice cold and menacing. "I know you've been digging into my life, into everything I've worked for. But here's the thing, no one, not even you, can stop what's already in motion." You think you're the first person to try and take me down? You're not. But unlike the others, you have something to lose. You have a daughter who needs you. I gripped the phone tighter, my hands now slick with sweat. What are you talking about? The network isn't just about control, Karen sneered. It's about survival. You've meddled with things you don't understand, and now you've sealed your own fate. You should have left well enough alone. But you didn't. And now there's no going back. The phone line went dead before I could respond, before I could ask the 1,000 questions racing through my mind. I felt like I had just been punched in the stomach. She had been playing me from the start. She had known what I was doing, known how far I had gone to expose her, and now she was taunting me. She had control. And now she was threatening the one thing that mattered most to me, Lucy. The realization hit me like a freight train. Karen's network wasn't just about power, it was about survival, and it was ruthless. They had eyes everywhere, watching every move, anticipating every step. I wasn't just dealing with an angry neighbor. I was up against a well-oiled machine that had been operating in the shadows for years, its reach far beyond anything I had imagined. But even in the face of this devastating revelation, something inside me shifted. The terror that had been gnawing at me, the fear of losing Lucy, of not being able to stop Karen, it all started to turn into something else, something stronger. I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Karen had made a critical mistake. She had underestimated me. And now, with this revelation, I understood exactly what I was up against. But I also knew the most important thing of all. I had to keep fighting. For Lucy. For the community. For the truth. Because this wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about bringing an entire network of corruption and control to its knees, and I was going to make sure they paid for everything they had done. I wasn't going to stop until Karen and Victor and everyone involved were exposed for the monsters they were. No matter what it took, I would fight to the very end. The battle isn't over yet, and your voice matters. If you or someone you know has ever been affected by injustice, by systems that seem untouchable, it's time to stand up and fight back. Share this story, spread the word, and don't let anyone hide behind lies and power. Justice doesn't come on its own. It takes courage, unity, and determination. Let's make sure Karen's reign of terror ends here. Your support, your voice, can change everything. Let's take back control together.